Here I am dropping it. Streaming it.
Yeah.
Great.
We have the overlap of.
I feel cooler already. All right, we are good to go. All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this special meeting of the Town of Bristol Board of Finance to order June 11th, 2025, 6 p.m. in the Town Hall Meeting Room. First order on the agenda is the roll call to order.
We have all members present with the exception of Mark.
Okay, second item on the business, on the agenda, rather, old business discussion and possible action on fiscal year 25-26 budget. We are here tonight because the general government budget passed and the Board of Education budget failed. Therefore, the only work that can be done on the budget is on the Board of Education side. And before we jump in, I'm going to take just a moment to share some of my thoughts with regard to the budget. I don't tend to talk. I don't tend to participate in discussion. Budget time is about the only time that I do that. So I'm just going to kind of share my thoughts and share where I think maybe we might want to look to try to settle in. Understanding obviously that it is going to be largely up to the six of you to move this forward. I'm thankful that we received the $1 million in tuition revenue. It doesn't just benefit the school, it benefits the town, it benefits everybody, because the realization is that's revenue that is used to offset expenses. That it does have a direct impact on the mill rate. However, when I look at that $1 million, it's my opinion that all $1 million perhaps should not have been completely reallocated back into the Board of Ed budget. And I say that because of this. Certainly for the, I don't know, nearly 16 years I've been on the board and looking at some of the historical data before that, year after year, the revenue numbers typically increased about $200,000 year over year, with the occasional, $400,000 increase, or maybe a little slightly higher blip on that. But it's been pretty steady at the $200,000 to $400,000 increase in a year over year metric. Maybe it went to 500 in a couple of years. Maybe it might have hit 600, but we've never had such an exponential growth in that number. And obviously that's tied to your tuition numbers, which meant that there was some sort of an exponential growth on the tuition side as well. So when I see a number like that, I take a step back and I want to give pause, because I consider that number to be an anomaly in its onset. If for a decade or more you haven't seen an increase like that, and suddenly it's anywhere between 5 times to 2.5 times what your typical average or number is, I get a little concerned with wanting to just jump all in without, being a little bit cautious. Where are we going to land next year? What's that number going to be next year? Well, we won't know. We don't know what the context is on why did those numbers jump so that could be affected that much. But for me, I'm cautious when I see that. I think it's also important that we don't forget that, we were over in our surplus, over by policy. So we utilized $550,000 for capital, but we didn't use that $550,000 in addition to capital. We were faced with a mill rate that to us at the time, I think, was insurmountable, and we were looking for ways to get it down. So we said, let's cut capital by $550 and let's use that overage in surplus to fund capital. That resulted, I think, at about a 0.6 maybe mill rate decrease, so that we were getting a little closer to what we thought was going to be palatable by the taxpayers. Well, we did what we did, and we all understood why we needed to do what we did. But at the same time, it does set us up for something that we need to look at next year. Very similar to when you use surplus to fund a revenue shortfall, we used surplus in lieu of real expense monies. So we need to make that up. So next year, when we look at capital, we're either going to end up having to, if the money's not there, we're either going to have to reduce capital by 550, or we're going to have to find another source of revenue to make up that difference, because we did use surplus to fund that expense. That kind of builds on why I don't think we should have necessarily gone all in on the $1 million. Look, I don't think that you're not deserving, and credit to you for getting your numbers are where they are, and you're able to generate that. Kudos to you. I'm just looking at it from a practical dollars and cents standpoint. And as I approach the budget cycle, I approach it with 1 foot in this year and 1 foot in next year. You always try to figure out, what are we doing this year that's going to affect our position for next year. So, over the last week or so, there's been quite a bit of movement that has a potential to impact the budget tonight. And one of those is the state budget. As part of the state budget, they allocated, was it an additional 40 million, Eric?
For special ed.
For excess cost grant. So initially, Eric did some calculations, and he initially thought, whoa, we could be getting, I think, somewhere around, $360,000 more in excess cost monies. In addition to that, I looked at what they had budgeted, and they budgeted, I think, 860,000 for excess cost. Yet this year they received 950,000. Is that correct?
952,614.
Okay.
And we're anticipated to get an additional 210,000 based on Governor and Lamont's $40 million to add to the state budget.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Can I just
yeah,
say
go ahead.
something on
Yeah.
that? The 210,000 is, they added 40 million in the current year, and that's that 40 million they added in the next year.
Yeah.
So that part's 210. The other part of that 350 or
Yep.
360 that I was thinking is a new special ed grant.
That's
Which-
30 million.
Yeah,
Okay.
they allocated 30 million for that, so there's a possibility if the percentages are the same,
Okay.
but we still don't know exactly how that grant's gonna work, and is that what we will be getting?
Right. Okay. So I looked at it, what they received versus what they had budgeted, and said, well, that seems like that could be a static or could go up. So I'm thinking we had another, 90,000. So I had meetings with the superintendent. I had meetings with the assistant superintendent, and with the finance director, who had his business manager hat on at the time. Trying to, for me, I guess, kind of strategize, how do we move forward? What's the least amount of impact across the board with the biggest gain? So Eric, for probably the last, gosh, I don't know, 3 or 4 days, or maybe even more than that, took a deep dive into, the current and historical data with the school to try to determine, okay, what can we anticipate receiving in additional excess cost grant monies. And I'm going to guess that you were conservative in that, because you don't want to figure that too high and then come in short. So, and I'm glad that he did that, because the number came in less than what initially was thought. So he had determined that, based on all of the information that he has, that we're looking at this, can I say strong potential? Is that a good way to describe that?
200.
Yes, a strong potential of receiving an additional $200,000 in excess cost grant money. So those monies get directly netted against special education costs within the Board of Education budget. Part of my conversations with the three of them was trying to figure out where do we land the plane? What is kind of palatable for everybody across the board? And this is what I've come up with. If we were to cut $450,000 from the Board of Education budget, and we were to account for the additional $200,000 in the excess cost grants, that would really mean that that is a net realized cut that the Board of Education or school system would had to plan for of $250,000. So while we're cutting $450 from the budget, they've got to maneuver around for a $250,000 cut essentially. My conversations were, can you make that work? And both Sean and Glenn both did indicate that they did feel that was workable. Not necessarily ideal, but they could certainly work with that. That would land us at a 0.64 mill increase, which would put us at a total of a 2.42% increase in the budget from last year.
In the mill rate.
I mean, in the mill rate, rather. I'm sorry, mill rate. Thank you. That's all I got. Yes.
Is this 200,000 in PCS funding
Excess costs.
excess funds?
Yeah.
We'll get that for this coming fiscal year.
Right.
Will it repeat again in the following fiscal year, or is this like, I know the state does like a 2-year budget cycle.
Yeah,
So-
they included the 40 million both in both years of biennium.
Ms. Jim,
Yes, sir.
so with that, I guess my question to this board would be, what's everybody's opinion, what's palatable to the taxpayer at referendum, because, we're looking at the numbers, but we still gotta get it through. I mean, so this is the second time I just wanna make sure that we come into agreement that we're really gonna do the right thing and get this through this time. Which, for the lack of a better word, we failed to do the first time.
So what do you say?
What's the board feel is a palatable number? Is 0.64 good to get through referendum? Does everybody feel
No,
like that'll pass?
I'm asking you what your opinion is. You're
Um,
saying that you're asking.
After hearing, well, my opinion, I'd love to get it here. So after hearing what the chairman said, which that 200,000 was unknown to us, I'm assuming it was unknown to me. So I was thinking we had to be somewhere around a half mil, so 0.64, I would be comfortable knowing that it's not ideal, but it's something you guys could at least work with. And I'm feeling that we could get that through referendum. Again, I don't wanna go to a third one. I mean, at the same time, we waste more of the town's money by doing that, and maybe our first actions were, obviously they weren't good enough, and that there was an injustice, but at this point, we gotta fix it now, we gotta get it through, so. I mean, I feel pretty good about that. I was actually thinking a little lower than that, but after hearing what the chairman said and hearing what the board of ed was saying, or at least the superintendents, that, I would be comfortable with that. Knowing that the realized cut is really only $250,000 in reality, right? $250,000 after the grant back.
No, it's not a quarter
No, it's
million.
not.
No, it's not a quarter mil.
Quarter
No,
million.
$250,000.
Oh, quarter mil.
$250,000.
Quarter mil, oh,
Yeah.
quarter million,
Right.
yes,
That
I'm
the
sorry. I thought
actual
you
cut's
meant-
gonna be after the 200,000 of,
Right.
ECS grant.
Right.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman, about Eric, when you took the deep dive. Now I think I heard, at the beginning of the discussion, the chair say that last year the, ECS grant money was at somewhere around what? Now,
The excess cost was
Yeah.
952,000, then they added 210,000
and
this year.
this year, okay, and what had the Board of Ed budgeted for this cycle that we're in, not, for this budget? year that we're proposing?
860,000.
860. So they were 100,000, about 100,000 lower than what the state had given us last year, or the state
Yes,
was,
but in looking at their expenditures and the trends, the special ed costs are very high, so I'd hate
Okay.
to go too high on the excess costs.
okay. So really, the cut of 450, considering that we're probably going to get an additional 200, we could get more than the 200.
We could, but
Fairly easily, but not anything less than that is what you're saying.
right.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think this offers us, with peeling back the layers of the onion, we find that we might have an opportunity that hopefully resolves it for everyone. I've, after 20-some years on the Board of Finance, we recognize that there's always a tipping point, and the tipping point is a point where the taxpayers at referendum say no. And so, I've always felt that we were safe in the $500,000 range, that we can get enough support for a $500,000. 0.64 mil, is a little bit higher. I don't know whether the tipping point is exaggerated this year because of all the other stuff going on around for all of the taxpayers and all the expenses that they're facing. But if the board has a consensus for 0.64, I'm good for that. I just want to make sure that, we don't have an issue where we have to make up a lot of money next year.
Eric, how much, more would have to be cut to go to a 0.50? Or from the fund balance, all cut? What's the number?
130,000.
130,000. How much are we taking out of the fund balance right now?
For capital, 530,000.
I think 0.64 is a good amount.
I don't want to take too much out of the fund balance. but I can go with 0.64.
I'm a ride to this.
So I was thinking, Corvette came in with a 4.8% increase, they got all of that. If we were to cut them down to 3.8%, it's only a 1% difference. So that would have been a 310 cut, $310,000 cut. But effectively, with this additional ECS money, their impact is only 250,000. So it's less than a cut than I was proposing. I'm gonna go with the 0.64, no increase.
Rob?
Same board as Tom. Coming in, I didn't want to see a deep cut. I know there were members of the board who wanted to see 0.5. Just because they didn't want to come back for another referendum. I'm not afraid of that personally. Because I feel that we could easily overcut. And not give the towns, take away services from the town that they could have had because we were fearful of them voting it down. I don't put myself in a position where I think I know what the townspeople want. I know, can only go by what I think and, what people I'm in contact with, who I talk to. Saying, when it comes to budget, I think we made a mistake with the town budget and fully funding it, which I learned from my mistakes. Because, you know, with the cuts that we're making to the Department of the Board of Ed, will result in losing positions where we've added positions to the town that are not critically needed. But, so I can go with the, since hearing at the Board of Ed, can work with the 0.64. I'm fine with that.
Chairman, I think this is a good faith effort to get what we need to get to the town with a minimal amount of pain. This is a balancing act about, you know, what we get and what we need, and how best to get to where we need to get to. And I think the discipline of having cuts may be something to look at going down the road, but I think in this situation, we have a good opportunity here to get something of value for both the town and the school. So I agree with the recommendations.
So Eric, just as a matter of procedure, with whatever we end up motioning, when we motion, do we need to include in that motion that, to adjourn to referendum as part of that motion? Because it no longer goes to town meeting at this
Yeah,
point.
you
It goes-
have to adjourn the referendum with the date we're looking at, 24.
So that all needs to be included as part of that
I would
motion.
include it.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Eric. Hypothetically speaking, excess funds that come in. Say for some reason, the school gets increased tuition. Or grants come in and stuff like that. Does that automatically go to the town or does that go against their budget?
The grants, it depends, but the general revenues that are budgeted in the general fund go back to our fund balance.
All right, so they wouldn't see, if they got 10 more students, they wouldn't see the benefit of that. It mean, because they've taken a cut, it wouldn't fill in those gaps.
No.
It would go into our into our emergency fund.
Yeah.
Eric, I got another procedural question for you as my mind's kind of working here. You need two motions then, correct? First one would be a cut with a vote, and then the second one would be to
motion to
adjourn the referendum at this dollar value, overall dollar value
No, the
with a
motion
referendum
will
date?
be- The first motion will be to send the Board of Ed budget in the amount you decide on.
Yeah.
Back to referendum.
Okay.
And then the next motion will be a motion to adjourn to referendum on so and so date.
Okay, you'd need a motion for the overall cut though too, correct, first?
Yeah,
Yeah,
And what would the Board of Ed number be if we subtracted the 450 from it?
it would be 32,920,859.
850,
Nine.
Need a motion to cut $450,000 from the Board of Education budget.
I'm sorry, Gary, what,
A motion to cut
okay,
$450,000 from the Board of Education budget.
Second,
okay, we have a first and a second, any discussion? Hearing none, we're gonna vote, all in favor,
I,
any opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to send the Board of Education budget of $32,920,859 to referendum and to adjourn this budget to referendum
Can I just have you
On
insert the date of the,
June 24th.
yes,
2025.
thank you.
Second.
All right. Eric, you good with that?
Yeah,
With that
make a
motion.
second, Rob.
Rob? And you good with that as is?
Yeah, but I would just, when you adjourn, say you're adjourned.
Okay,
For the next.
okay. All right, any discussion? And then we're gonna vote all in favor?
I
Any opposed? That motion carries. And do I
make a
have
motion to adjourn to referendum.
Second.
first and second? We have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? We're adjourned.
Are we legal? Eric? You have us with all the language that we
Yeah.
need? Okay. All right.